Hello and welcome everybody to episode 3 of your Gateway to Miracles, 7 weeks and 7 facets of flow. First 2 weeks, episode 1 was the unknown and episode 2 being unclear. And we're on episode 3, acceptance, this week. And we have some lovely synchronicities this week with the subject being acceptance. And I like to call them flow incidences now. This play on language is part of the lightness and the kind of more humorous side of life that I'm privileged to have started to see since being more consciously connected to flow. Flow being the infinitely intelligent, perpetual movement behind all life. So flow incidences. Today it is the day of the full moon in Leo, which hit us, so to speak, at midnight. So right at the very beginning of our official day, Saturday the 11th of February. If you're watching a recording of this, it's 2017, Saturday the 11th of February. And we are in the energy of a powerful, fiery Leo full moon, which also came with an eclipse. Not a full eclipse, but a lunar eclipse nonetheless. So amplifying and magnifying the energy of the moon. Now, it's really only been in recent months, actually, even though the Flow Coach as an entity has been alive and kicking since November 2014. It's only been in the last few months that I've really started to engage in exploration of the natural world, the world outside our window, as I often refer to it without thinking. And this is because we cannot separate ourselves from any living thing, any creature, any being of energy, anything in this physical world, I'll say, because everything comes from something and everything goes to something, because no energy ever is lost. It just transmutes and changes and moves into the circle of life. And so the moon is a key part of this, and we are privileged to be able to have a very advanced body of science behind us these days that we can call upon. And most scientists, I'm sure, would recognize that they have just hit the tip of the iceberg with what we can know. But as I said in the first week, the unknown, we are restricting ourselves by wishing to know everything. We're restricting ourselves by limiting the infinite possibilities, permutations and combinations that could happen moment to moment. So swimming in that unknown, we can still look outside the window and see what's going on. And the moon, we know, has a cycle. And the moon, we know, affects the tides. And we are 50 to 75% water, we humans. So to think that there can be no effect of the moon, which is part of flow, the perpetually moving infinite intelligence behind life, to think that there's no effect or partnership or communion with we human bodies of energy, I think would be missing a huge part of the physical existence that we inhabit on here on Mother Earth, another planet, another celestial body. So it's with excitement, actually, although I have been feeling myself the movement towards this shadow of the eclipse, of feeling unsettled and feeling flat and in a period of waiting, actually, a period of anticipation and less action and more just being and having to let go, which is the theme that runs through every single facet of flow, is letting go of this desire to move, take action, as we moved into this shadow period of the eclipse. And we have another eclipse in 2 weeks' time on February the 26th, which is a solar eclipse this time, which is when the Earth, now forgive me because I don't know what it is. There are certain things that confuse me, and eclipses are one thing that confuses me, but the Earth comes between the sun and the moon, blocking out the sun for us. So the moon comes between the sun and the earth, blocking out the sun for us on the 26th of February, partially again, but it casts a shadow. So what intrigues me about this is this light period between the two shadow periods, these 2 weeks, And according to astrology, and some call astrology the cosmic weather of the planet. So we can look to it to see if there's some kind of forecast, but it's interpretative, and it's dependent upon our conscious connection with it, even though we're part of it always. So we have this light period between the two eclipses of the full moon today and the new moon on the 26th of February. And this is the time when we can allow our shadows to be seen, I believe, and allow that to come up for us. Now, I was intrigued to discover in a personal way recently, in an argument with my partner, Damien, I'm lucky to sort of share this journey into and through flow and conscious connection in his business, Rethink. And we fight, we argue a lot, and we've argued a lot more recently, and I believe this is because of this quickening that's happening, this universal quickening. We've seen it happen towards the end of the universal 9-year, 2016, Brexit, Trump, we had the Dakota pipeline, which we know has changed again and challenged our collective consciousness again. But this quickening and these arguments, these small microcosms of our own lives, are just reflections of the magnified whole. And I had a realization that the parts of him that were frustrating me were parts of me that were reflected back. And this isn't new. This isn't new to me, and I'm sure it won't be new to anyone here listening. That this is what happens. We see what we know is within us. But I suddenly realized that there was a slightly different angle to this for me now, and it's simply this: that once upon a time it might be, right, this is great, this is my mirror, these are the negative sides of me, the shadow sides of me that I wish to change, that I want to push away, that I want to leave behind, that I want to write on a piece of paper and burn and never see again. But it occurred to me in a sense of relief, and a good feeling, which is always my barometer for it being a sign of wisdom, that this is the part of me these are the parts of me to accept and to love and to integrate into my wholeness, all energies. And of course, just like letting go of something and surrendering the desire for it, which is the attachment, can bring it to us, so is loving and accepting those sides of us that are confronting and that are brought to our attention in maybe an uncomfortable way. So too does accepting and loving those things allow them to transmute and change without our interference, without our trying to force that change, without us judging what that change should look like. So this was a slightly different feel for me to that productive, active, doing side of, and I'll call it personal development for want of a better phrase, where we see things and we decide to change them and take action against it. Anything that we are putting focus on, we're likely to attract. And the idea that what you resist persists does hold a lot of usefulness for me. And letting go is releasing something out there for flow to take, for flow to move on, and for flow to bring something in its place. Eckhart Tolle said a wonderful phrase that I come back to time and time again when I might be feeling lost myself, because it's so short and simple. Life is the dancer and we are the dance. So we're not writing the choreography and forcing the moves, we're being danced by life, and there's a much more joyous, effortless feel to that. So in accepting this time of potential transformation that's written in the stars, so to speak, that's part of the lunar energy that we're part of, it's a real opportunity for us to be aware. And I would invite you to do no more than that, not to slip into action mode, but to be aware of anything that comes up that might be different, might be confronting or challenging, and accept it and love it. And love will be the subject of week 7. But really, each and every single facet that I talk about each week is very much part of the other. They're all very much connected. And in acceptance, there's an inherent love. And I've talked before about these two emotional energies, if you like, of fear and love, and that I cannot find, for want of looking and for want of asking, any emotional feeling that fills the category of love or any other category other than love or fear. So when you're not in fear, you're in love, and when you're not in love, you're in fear. To varying degrees perhaps, but those are the essence of each energy. So in accepting this 2-week period, I invite you to integrate whatever's going on within your wholeness, and perhaps this is when we move into that energy of forgiveness. And forgiveness is very, very much connected with acceptance. Indeed, would it be possible to forgive ourselves or someone else without first accepting? And accepting isn't, by acceptance, I'm not talking about making that decision that what's happened was your preferred course or was your desired behavior from yourself or other people, but accepting because it is what it is, and accepting. It's a neutral energy. It's a neutral energy, and life is neutral, but for what thought we put to it. So, and we have language which helps us to interpret and communicate those thoughts. So the word forgiveness in the English language is a word that helps us to keep moving and take that step forward and not get stuck or stagnated and try to block that flow of energy that's always moving for us, because it is always moving for us. But if we're in the energy of trying to block it, we're not hearing it, we're not allowing it, we're not in the energy of it. So we are going to feel that clunkiness of the off balance of being in something but not accepting you are. It's like being in a job and not wanting to be there. And if you could relax and accept where you are, you'd probably have a lot more fun and a lot more enjoyment of it. And indeed in relationships, and potentially accepting and allowing the wisdom in that relationship if it's not going right, and then making a decision whether to stay or go if that's where you're at. But being in an energy of denial is potentially not allowing you to make the right decision, and not for you in that moment, and not allowing flow to keep moving through you. So forgiveness is something that is almost, I'm going to say, not necessary, because there's nothing to forgive. And what do I mean by that? Because it's such a huge concept in all religions. And the basis of religion is to have a story from which to have faith in a power higher than ourselves, or bigger than ourselves, or more than just one separate person. So the very concept of religion, I believe, comes from the same point, whichever religion you're from. And forgiveness often plays a part, certainly in the Christian upbringing that I had. But when you really understand, or when you can, let's not put it like that, when you can start to entertain the notion that perhaps there's nothing to forgive, it makes it easier to unblock your feelings of stagnancy, staleness, trying to stay there, trying to stay in that negative emotion, wanting to punish that person, wanting to punish yourself. And the reason that there really is nothing to forgive is that we're all basing our behavior and our actions upon the assumption that what we're thinking in that moment is true. And when you start to investigate the fact that our thinking is an illusion that we make up ourselves moment to moment, and you start to explore the fact that just because you're thinking one thing, exploring the fact that thinking one thing is a personal decision. And I suppose I'm being careful with my words here, because it's not the thinking that really creates our experience. It's actually our feelings. And because we're conscious human beings that have an awareness of what we're thinking, often subconscious level, but it shows up in our feelings. So this is why I use the phrase feelings barometer, because we might not know what we're thinking, and how can we have, depending on what research you read, between 20,000 and 120,000 thoughts a day. And I don't know about you, but I'm not prepared to go chasing them all down. But I get a reading in my body of how I'm feeling. So if we are all creating our experiences of life the same way, by having a thought that we become aware of via our feelings, and then taking action from it, whatever that action is, whether we perceive it as negative or positive or somewhere in between, if we're all creating that from the same place, we have a great equality. We have a great knowledge of how unified we are, and how on one level we are, and how there's no one person better or worse or different even than the other, because we all start from the same basis. We're all born. And this is where I segue into the discovery that Sydney Banks had, and I already have. And I know that there are people listening to this who are very aware of this, and whose understanding of this is very deep. And Sydney Banks had the insight, the enlightened moment of realizing that we create our experience of life via three principles. A principle being a fact, like gravity. It's a truth. It's just a simple, very simple. That's why some people often miss it. I did for a couple of years. Simple truth about life. And those three principles are the power of thought. We create our experience moment by moment via our thinking. The power of consciousness, that we're aware of that thinking via our feelings. And the power of mind. And mind, really, in a nutshell, is what I call flow. And I use the word flow because of the movement. Mind, for me, doesn't encapsulate the perpetual motion, the cycle of life. So given that, we layer our life on top of those three principles, given that that's true, how can we find it difficult to forgive? And if that understanding really sinks, and we see that that person that did that thing to us, and that language I don't use for myself anymore, but it's universal. If they did that from a misunderstanding, from believing their thinking was true, isn't it easier to forgive? And of course, it comes back to us daily. We have thoughts, we believe them, we act from them. We forget that that thought wasn't true, but we remember that that's how we created our experience, that we did it innocently, and we can forgive ourselves and we can move on. So this acceptance of what's happening and allowing ourselves to forgive, because there's nothing to forgive, because it's innocent, allows the flow of life to move through us. And we allow ourselves to be a big space for flow, rather than a contracted space because we're trying to block it or force it back or force it up or force it down or force it in whichever way that it's not going, because it's going in whichever way it's going. So keeping that movement going, or allowing that movement to keep flowing, is the energy of acceptance, or the energy of acceptance allows that movement to keep flowing and keep going, so that we can keep moving through our life moment to moment, hearing, understanding, feeling the wisdom, the power of mind, as Sydney Banks saw it, but flow, as I like to call it now, because of the motion and the movement. And it reminds me to stop blocking it, to be unresistant, to be allowing. So forgiveness. Now the other emotion, the other word, the other piece of language that we use that's very close to acceptance is gratitude. Now, gratitude is a word that we hear a lot, and I don't expect there's anybody who would resist the fact that gratitude can only help us, can only be a benevolent feeling, a feeling of gratitude. And I think it's that understanding, that simple understanding that gratitude's a good thing, that has allowed the burgeoning of the idea of affirmations being useful. The idea of having a gratitude diary and writing your gratitude pages in the morning. I've done all these things, and they've been helpful. They have been helpful, reminding ourselves what's good in our lives, or what we perceive as good in our lives, because of course that's just another thought. But I do know that I went through a phase not so long ago where I was forcing the gratitudes. Does that make sense? That I was looking around me and not feeling grateful for the things I thought I should be grateful for. And that almost had a double whammy, amplifying negative effect, because there was a guilt involved. So once, maybe the day before I'd felt grateful for that, but then the next day I didn't, and so being able to consistently feel gratitude for the same things, I invite you to explore the potential that isn't possible. And I've been seeing a few things around on social media recently about being consistent being the answer to things, and it's something that I want to move away from, that I would like to put to you isn't the effortless, easy way to feeling that your life is flowing. Consistency can be another force, another control, another tick in the box on your to-do list, another thing to beat ourselves up about, another thing to fail at. But when you are allowing the moment to be exactly as the moment is, when you're accepting that moment, you feel it in your body. Your shoulders drop. Your breathing resumes. Let's say it's coming from a moment where you've not been accepting that moment, when you've been feeling that you'd rather push that moment away. You're in an energy of denial. And often that can be what can be happening when you're there with your gratitude diary and you're going, well, I'm grateful for my children, I'm grateful for my family, I'm grateful for the money in the bank, or whatever it is. But if you're not feeling grateful, what is that really helping you? Are you allowing the flow of life as it is in that moment to be with you in the way that it's showing up for you? Or are you in denial and forcing it to be in another way, or trying to control it? I think it's probably the latter. However, if you accept the way that you're feeling, which correlates to accepting what's happening in your life right now, the potential for gratitude is reopened to you. It's opened up again where it might not have been before. So accepting that you're not feeling grateful, and often it can also bring back the lightness. You can smile at the fact that you're really not grateful for your kids that day, and you were just hugely grateful yesterday, and what's going on here, you don't have to analyze it. But accepting that your feelings change, accepting that you can be in one energy of emotion one moment, not even one day, and in another the next moment, allows you to keep moving, and allows your body and your mind, your personal mind, to be an expanded space. You're in the, if you like, motion of breathing in. When you have a larger bandwidth, a larger space for that flow to keep moving through you. And it can't be a coincidence, can it, that breathing in and expanding, and as a tightened bud is contracted and it grows, it's open up to space. Can it really be a coincidence that as life moves and we grow bigger? I'm thinking of that film, Benjamin Button now, where he went from old to young. We go from young to old, we go from small to big, but those are the way things work for us here. I have a phrase, question everything, that I use now, a kind of an idea that I float out there in my life and with my clients. Just question everything. This is how we know life. But how could life be otherwise if we, but that's just what we know. So but everything has a purpose. So this is how our life works for us for a reason. So we expand and we can allow the movement to come through easily. It's not being forced through or having to come through us in a clunky way that we're misfiring and not hearing the words of wisdom that we need to hear in our interpretative minds. So I like to play with something called acceptances sometimes rather than affirmations. So maybe instead of being in that space where you're looking at yourself in the mirror, and I'm being a bit flippant here because this is the archetypal example of I am beautiful, I love myself. And as I've said, affirmations have a place because they work for some people some of the time, but not all of the people all of the time. But being real and being where we are and accepting helps us to have that little springboard up the feelings barometer, if you like, levels of consciousness. There's all sorts of different language around this, and it's whatever works for you, to maybe start tiptoeing into that feeling of gratitude, which is really a bigger space and which can really allow flow to come through us. Because ultimately, isn't what we're doing when we're denying what's going on in our life? Aren't we actually moving out of the current moment? And I feel like I'm stealing my partner Damien's idea for his book right now, but it's, we're all in the same energy, in the same world, the same life. But what he's writing in his book, The World Peace Equation, is far more sophisticated than this, but this is part of it. And it's the difference between, or the perceived difference, and this is really important, the perceived difference between what's going on for us now, what's right here in front of us, and where we think, and that word think also is important as well as perceived, where we think we want to be instead. So the perceived difference between where we are right now, here, and where we think we want to be, like when we're in the office and we want to be on the beach, or when one of our kids is having a meltdown and we'd rather be sitting in a spa somewhere. If we allow what's going on to go on, to step out of judgment of it, to allow it to be, there's a settling. Acceptance allows things to settle down. This is why so many people are proponents of breathing. Well, we're all proponents of breathing, I would hope, but it's incredible how many of us forget to breathe in that real pulling in of the life force way of breathing that those who practice yoga or any kind of pranic practice or meditation even. But if we are in a moment where we're in denial of where we are rather than acceptance, a simple breath in, isn't it, can be all it takes. It might just be the memory, the reminder of, I'm trying to change something that is. I'm trying to go back and change what happened 5 minutes ago, 5 seconds ago. Ever tried that? Ever been in the space of moving your mind way in the future that you're not even focusing on what's going on now? And you see there's a real contradiction here, isn't there, between what I'm saying and this whole idea, which is very enticing, tantalizing, and enigmatic, of visualization, law of attraction, bringing to you what you want. And I'm not saying there's no truth in that. Far from it. I think there is truth in that. But if we are consistently, there's that word, consistent, if we're consistently throwing our attention into a future that hasn't happened yet and taking it away from where we are now, we're completely out of acceptance of what is happening for us. We're in a future space of something that doesn't exist. Just like we would be if we were thinking about the past, because that doesn't exist either. Now, if we are sitting in a quiet space and we don't have anything particular going on for us right now, yes, the pleasure and the blessing of a completely quiet mind is compelling to me. But if we have nothing that is particularly taking our focus, nothing that is around us or happening for us, because everything that happens is happening for us, including that child's tantrum or that guy in the office that's pushing our buttons, then maybe we can have some fun. Maybe wisdom will show up in a let's have a play with the future message to us. Let's have a little look and see where I want to move to. You know, if you've been having wisdom thoughts of wanting to change, make a shift in your life, making a change of your environment, for example. So yeah, there's a place for that dreamy, expanded future. The word future doesn't feel right. I don't know why, but I'll just share that with you. It doesn't feel right because perhaps maybe everything's happening now, whether we know it or not. But we see it as the future on our linear timescale. And maybe the word future doesn't feel right because we're very much in flow. When we are in flow world, which is what I call the world at large, even though my current program is called Flow World, and we're experimenting in a microcosm of 7 people moving through Flow World, examining, exploring the 7 facets of flow. But when we're in Flow World, we are allowing what is to be and what will be to be. And perhaps it's not thinking about the future that's going to allow the future to come to us, which is counterintuitive to everything from pensions, insurance, the business plan. You know, every part of our contemporary society calls upon us to place our attention away from the moment. Every part, maybe not every part, I'm exaggerating probably, but there's many more areas of our contemporary society that I can think of that ask us to pull ourselves away from the moment. And that intrigues me. And part of the experiment within Flow World is to be with the moment and to allow the next moment to come up. So we do make plans. So I made a plan to speak to you at 7 o'clock today. But if it hadn't happened for whatever reason, I would have accepted that. You know, I was, up until just before I hopped on, I was just putting my little 12 months old to bed. And the interesting thing I'm finding that every time I allow things to unfold rather than force them, what I kind of had in the back of my mind as an idea of how it would work out kind of is what happens, but it's not with any force or attachment on my part. And this is what I'm experimenting and being conscious connection with, in being in conscious connection to flow. So it's kind of like I'm trying is a bit too much of a forceful word, but I'm experimenting and with the idea of being able to present evidence out to say, well, this is how it's evolving for me. If you'd like to dip your toe in flow, do so. And this is what I'm finding. So there's no set rules to this. We're moving away from rules. We're moving away from the law. We're moving away from knowing what's going to be. But we're accepting what is and allowing the next moment to come in. And the way that it's been unfolding for me and my clients in Flow World, and the way that I've been communicating it in this medium of language that we have, which is the best we have to communicate, but can unify us, can divide us depending on the interpretation. But the way that I'm looking at it is by launching ideas. So moving away from the goal, and I have mentioned this in previous episodes, but it's important to, I guess, reiterate what comes up in each session, because there's no real separation between the 7 facets. They're all part of it. And when I'm flowing with what I'm talking to you, I can't pull bits out without making it into a whole. So I hope that makes sense to you. I'm kind of having to be in the space of flow all times. There is no separation for me. I am me when I'm talking to you, when I'm talking to my kids, when I'm talking to a potential client, when I'm talking to an actual client, when I'm talking to the proverbial bank manager. So the idea that I launch ideas now instead of setting intentions or writing goals. So a goal for me was, this space, attention was this space, and an idea In fact, at the moment, I might end up finding another word that's even bigger, but an idea is all, anything. It's just an idea of what might feel good. So I had the idea to do a 7-week course, which evolved into this delivery to you. It became 8 sessions as I was writing the copy for the page. And it became a non-systematized course. At the moment, I've got 13 people who are listening to recordings or live, lucky for some. And so I write personally to each person. And, there's no forcing it to look in a certain way. Does that make sense? I'm accepting that there aren't 100 people on the course, but there aren't 1 or 2. It's however many people are here. And so I launched the idea for the course and moving with it week by week. I came up with the idea last week of thinking, well, if the people who are listening to this, and I'm getting some good feedback, want a bit more one-to-one help to see where it applies in their lives, to see what it means for them right now, let's offer a cheap session in a cheap flow coaching session to them. So, without going into too much detail, just to kind of illustrate where the acceptance comes before the letting go, if you like, because it's the letting go that is the backbone, if you like, or the holding structure to every single facet of the 7 facets of flow. And it reminds me actually of, I was told recently about the dollar sign. The dollar sign is the structure is the line, and then the kundalini is the flow around it. So it's quite ironic, really, with sort of the way that a lot of us are perceiving the United States of America is going at the moment. But there is a structure. There's a structure to nature. We know that the seasons are going to go in a certain order. We know that the moon will wax and wane, will cycle through full and new. And we know that the sun goes up and down. But within that, we don't know. So there's a structure with a flow around it. And in a way, this is what we do. This is what I'm suggesting I was going to say model, but it's going back to how it was. We put all these veils, these processes, these structures on top of the natural world of which we are a part. We started to decide that we should do it man's way. And it's kind of like trying to, allow progress, particularly, places like medicine come to mind, allow progress from wisdom, from a place of flow, but not that masks nature, that dampens it down, that doesn't allow us to be in our full natural state. So in launching an idea, I know that the next day it could be completely different, or it's completely off the table. And so this is where the power of acceptance and the energy of feeling that we're accepting that is key. Because if we can't accept that things change and things move, we're in a stale energy, we're in old energy of not letting go. And so I think acceptance is a key. If you want to put a kind of level to it, it's a key underpinning of allowing ourselves to explore the unknown, of allowing ourselves to be unclear, of allowing ourselves to trust and surrender, which will be the weeks 4 and 5. And maybe even allowing ourselves the space to love, to choose love. And if we can accept ourselves with all our wrinkles and rolls of fat and whatever else, just one example, we can accept, self-love becomes easier. We can accept other people around us and their innocent interpretation of their thoughts as truth, from which they then act. We can forgive, and we're back to love again. So arguably acceptance of the 7 facets of flow is one that really underpins, because we're making a decision that things are good or bad anyway. So just accepting that things are, full stop, is a place to start, is a place to then get back into the flow consciously and go with it. So I kind of started off with that, the preamble of the moon. And it's a wonderful flow incidence, a synchronicity, that this week 3 acceptance is today. I didn't plan that. How did I decide when to start? I'd started this course on the 28th of January 2017, if you're watching this as a recording, simply because of the Chinese New Year, and that was a new moon. So I did look out of the window, the world outside the window, see what universal patterns, and thought that would be a good launch energy. But then I didn't know that the third Saturday, where acceptance was, would be this very important full moon lunar eclipse that is throwing us into shadow, which is throwing us into a space where we could quite easily slip out of acceptance in a really dramatic way, into denial, into frustration, into resentment, into self-flagellation, into the energy that's opposite to forgiveness. If we're starting to surface any of our shadow sides, or see in other people the shadow. And there's so much shadow work going on around us at the moment. We see it in politics so much right now, and I'm not even going to go into the details of what's been happening, because it's when we go into the detail that we start to make judgments. We start to believe our thinking, instead of allowing our thoughts to move through, to keep the space for the next one through, and to allow our consciousness to rise. And we are seeing this collective consciousness. And I do wonder whether some of the peaceful marching in the US, and about peaceful marching outside the US, about the US, in support of the US, which has been in a space of love, I wonder how much that comes from acceptance. It has to, really, doesn't it? We're accepting that this is happening. We're not railing against it. So there's a question inherent in this, isn't there? And when you look at yourself, what do you see? And when you look out at the world, what do you see? And whatever the answer to that question is, you can decide to see it with curiosity and with exploration, and accept the way it is, from whatever place you've started to see it from. And I think this is what people maybe are starting to do in this collective, peaceful way of showing that we would prefer it to be different. There's a lot of other energy around, of course. But the more you are in that love energy and invite acceptance in, don't you find that you find more acceptance from others, that you find more love in others? And I'll be talking more about that element in week 6, which is connection, because of the fact that we're all a mirror of each other, because of the fact that we have spent so much time, and this is the proverbial we, who is we really? It's we on this call. I know that there's 5 wonderful people live with me on February the 11th, 2017, but we as a community, family, nation, we're looking more towards love. We're starting to make those decisions and recognize that fear creates more shadow. And that fear as an energy is what's shutting out the love. And if we're doing it for ourselves, we're doing it for everyone else. There's so much wonderful science. It's probably in the quantum sense of the word. We go back to the tiniest essence, when we see that the cells that in our bodies replicate some of the celestial beings in our solar system. Just that evidence just blows my mind, because it's not been something that I've been brought up with, to see that we're made the same, that energy that makes a star is the energy that makes us. So in recognizing that it's like a peace that can descend upon us because we are in the same energy. We have a collective responsibility. Now, I suppose the word responsibility can bring pressure depending on how we look at it. But if we know that just by making one small change ourselves, we can make a difference to the whole, would that make a difference to how we choose to perceive ourselves? Would it make a difference on and allow us to start off with accepting and move on from there? So there's kind of, I suppose historically, there's been a bit of a sort of meh energy about acceptance, hasn't there? It's sort of, oh, I don't want to accept. I want to fly high. I want to live life in the fast lane. I'm not accepting where I am because that's for losers. That's just living the small life. We hear a lot, certainly in my industry, even now, I hear a lot about, don't want to play small and go big kind of thing. Again, that's perception. But we think that accepting where we are is grounds for not achieving and not being successful. But I'm hoping that, what time is it now? I'm hoping that the last 45 odd minutes might have just given us all an inkling together of how accepting is a launch pad to so much more. Because if being successful really lies in how we feel, a lot of money doesn't guarantee we feel good, nor does poverty guarantee we're going to feel bad. It's always the most useful example to give, and I'll always trot it out when I'm not wanting to go into too much detail. But if success is really just all about the feeling, when we can allow flow to move through us and be with this universe that is effortlessly moving of its own accord, is the energy of ease and effortlessness a good feeling, a helpful feeling? I would say so. And as more wisdom comes through via the motion of flow, and we see the miracles that happen in our lives, and we allow ourselves to keep moving and notice those miracles, notice the everyday miracles that drop in for us. They can come in all shapes and sizes. But without accepting, are we giving ourselves the right springboard, the right launch pad for that? Because it is like a springboard. Otherwise, there's kind of a hole there that we kind of just sort of go down, and like we're constantly trying to scrabble up. There's like that kind of image of nails in a pit, trying to sort of be successful and get up there because we've seen it, and we've got it by hard work and true grit. Whereas acceptance is like a gentle kind of trampoline that kind of launches ideas and allows us to shift and transform and transmute and flow with the energy of the universe rather than forcing it to be the way we think it should be. This is why acceptance is the third week, because talking about the unknown and being unclear is really the segue into accepting. Because if we're fearful of the unknown and we push away being unclear because we think clarity is the only way, being clear about the next year, 5 years, day, week, if we accept all of these things, the kind of excitement comes in that takes us to the next moment and gives us the idea to move on. And sometimes those ideas that are launched are big, and they can happen in the way that we maybe originally launched it, because perhaps it came from a massive insight of wisdom because you were allowing flow, because you were in acceptance. Who knows? But ultimately, we want our physicalness to be a space. And aren't we 90% space anyway, when you look at our solidity? So by being in the energy of spaciousness and expansiveness to allow things in, we're actually mirroring our physicality. So we're aligned. You know, we only have to look out to space. Wow, it's called space, for God's sake, and to see how much space there is there. Yet we try and block ourselves and pull so much stuff in. I've just got time to just sort of tell you where I am with acceptance personally, because I think, you know, just to kind of link it into real authenticity here. And space is, funnily enough, the perfect kind of launch pad to talk about this briefly. But I've been getting an awful lot of little messages coming into me about stuff, and my life being full of stuff, the world being full of stuff. I see my daughter, who I started off sort of watching some YouTube videos of some Peppa Pig and things like that. You know, I'm sure she's learned some of her language from Peppa Pig. But now that she's learned how to use it, she's finding other things. And I started to think they were harmless, but there's YouTube videos about gift bags full of plastic toys and colourful plastic this and plastic that, and wanting presents and gifts, and started to kind of really realise that Annie Rose, my 2-year-old, was starting to build this idea of life, that the more stuff you have and the more things you're given, the richer your life is. And because it seems so different to me now, that less is more, that it's about what's in us, not what we see outside of us. It started to kind of really look into, you know, be curious about where her wisdom stops and where conditioning starts. So we've been on an exploration, it's very, very early stages now, about letting go and shedding again. Damien and I did that in 2012. We sold and gave away everything we owned and fitted our life into a car, me and the dog and Damien, and moved around. We were at that point promoting his book, Do Nothing, in bookshops. That was sort of, we were starting to kind of be the message rather than the representative of the stuff we had. And when we moved back into a house and then had children, we've suddenly started accumulating again. So all this kind of query was coming up. Even the recycling we had felt ugly and vulgar. And then we magically have got this au pair from France who's in her 20s, and she's left university, doesn't know what she wants to do, but she's hugely passionate about the planet. She's teaching me all about what's happening with palm oil in the rainforests, what's happening with plastic, how accumulation of stuff is killing our natural world. And by very dint of the fact we're all part of this, we are deadening ourselves. And this is the very start of this journey, and I'm sure I'll share it with you when I talk about trusting and surrendering and connection. But, you know, the beached whale who recently last week was found with 30 plastic bags in its stomach and it died. You know, we are grossly overproducing in a way to promote our, what I call, subconscious separation. So because we've kind of subconsciously decided that we're separate, each of us is our own, you know, we must achieve this and we're in competition with that person. This is part of my program, Flow Business, or Flow Biz, thanks to Sheila Massand, who's listening to me now, it might be called Flow Biz. This idea of competition and moving away from that within what we call business. So I'm in a real open space right now, accepting where I'm at, where we are thinking, oh, wow, well, we actually might end up taking the kids, moving out, and completely paring down to goodness knows how many possessions and taking ourselves on the road again. I don't know how. I don't know how, and it might not happen, but that's the idea at the moment. And I'm accepting that idea has come in. So this idea of acceptance is applicable in everything. It's part of accepting the moment, accepting the thought in the moment, not just the situation outside, accepting where we're feeling, accepting what idea might have come through, because fear is excitement without the breath. If it comes into us and it feels like, oh, there's something in this, and we stop breathing and it becomes fear, and we start blocking the flow of this idea that could well be the one to keep us moving on, but we keep expanding. We accept that idea came in, and we ask for the energy of asking for the next idea, the next movement in that idea, and the next clarity in the moment, because I'm feeling very unclear about this right now, but it feels good. So I'll sign out now, I think, because we're nearing an hour, and I want to leave it on the note of the idea, actually, and kind of inviting you guys to be with whatever ideas come in. And this is actually another point on this. So conventional wisdom might be, I'm going to allocate a time to go and sit down and go and find my ideas. Another idea is to go about your life and allow the ideas to come to you. You know, it's a subtle difference, I know, it's a subtle difference, but there's a real different energy about that. What comes to you when you're moving from moment to moment, being in that moment? What ideas? You know, you might have your phone with you and speak into it or jot it down. But this is the opposite of forcing yourself to have an idea. This is allowing the idea in. Sometimes maybe accepting that you don't have the space or the moment to write it down or to go into the detail, but you've launched it just by having that feeling of the idea. And you will then get the time to maybe play with it. I did it in the middle of a course in October that was going on the stage, and I realized it wasn't forming anymore. So I spent the time being in the idea of what my business is going to look like. I didn't know that was going to happen. It just kind of flowed in. So I went with it. And because I was sitting with a pen in my hand and a piece of paper, I was like, well, I'm not going to ignore this sign. I'm going to write it down. But if we're not in that position, we're driving the car or I don't know, whatever else we might be, we need to be in the moment of having our attention in the here and now, maybe with other people. Then that's okay. That idea, share it with that person, move on. Allow it to evolve organically. Give it the life that it wants to have of its own, rather than pushing that life into it that you wish it to have. Okay, so I'm going to sign out with lots of love to you and say that next week is the next episode. Episode 4 is trust. That's quite a big one. They're all as big or as small as you wish to believe, but for me, trust can be a real juicy one. I'll send out the recording to everyone who's listening here live, and I'm always I'm open to hearing your questions, your feedback, what challenge me, for example. That's always fun. And we're all learning, we're all in this together, we're all students of flow. So with great gratitude and accepting this moment here and now for what it is, I sign off and wish you good night, good morning, good afternoon, and see you next time. Bye for now.